Most people lose the battle with toxic people before it even begins because they walk into the situation already needing something: approval, acceptance, validation, or recognition. Toxic people don't beat you with intelligence or strength. They beat you because they sense your hunger. They know you care too much about being liked, so they use that against you. The moment you depend on someone's approval, you hand them power. That's why they manipulate you. That's why they guilt trip you. That's why they criticize you and then pretend to care. You're stuck because you want them to like you more than you want to respect yourself. Most people enter toxic relationships as if they're competing to prove they're good enough. They spend years trying to show loyalty to someone who doesn't respect them, as if winning that person's validation is some kind of trophy. It's not a trophy, it's a trap. Toxic people don't change because you proved your loyalty. They don't suddenly respect you because you've endured their disrespect. They don't feel bad because you stayed through the pain. They feel powerful. And as long as you keep trying to be liked, they keep winning. The real problem isn't the toxic person. It's your emotional investment in winning them over. You think if you stay calm, if you do the right things, if you explain yourself properly, they'll eventually understand you. But toxic people understand you very well. They understand exactly what you want, and they use it against you. The best way to control someone is to make them believe your approval matters. When you chase their approval, they control your emotions. When they control your emotions, they control your decisions. And once they control your decisions, you're no longer dealing with them. You're serving them. That's why most people lose before the fight even starts. They go into the situation trying to maintain peace at all costs. They apologize just to avoid conflict. They explain themselves to someone who isn't even listening. They try to prove their intentions to someone who already decided to misunderstand them. Every time you debate, defend, or justify yourself to someone who doesn't value you, you're digging your own grave. Toxic people don't want clarity. They want confusion. They don't want solution. They want reactions. The moment you stop needing their approval, everything changes. You start responding differently. You no longer panic when they pull away. You no longer crumble when they criticize you. You stop explaining yourself. You start valuing your peace more than their opinion. That's the beginning of freedom. You start winning the moment you stop caring about winning them. Because when you don't need anything from a toxic person, they run out of ways to control you. Respect doesn't come from sacrifice. It comes from standards. And the most powerful decision you can make is to stop trying to be enough for someone who will never be satisfied as long as you keep trying. You don't deal with toxic people by changing them. You win by changing what you tolerate, because your standards will always beat your emotions. Most people get trapped trying to fix toxic people, convince them to be fair, or prove they deserve respect. But manipulation isn't cured with kindness, and disrespect doesn't disappear with patience. Toxic people don't need healing from you. They need boundaries from you. The mistake people make is assuming that if they love harder, explain better, or give more chances, the toxic person will suddenly wake up and appreciate them. That's fantasy. You're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist for the other person. They're not unhappy with how they treat you. They're happy with how easily you accept it. The more you endure disrespect, the more you normalize it, you start shrinking your standards to avoid conflict. You begin telling yourself things like, everyone has flaws, I don't want to overact, or it's not that bad. That's how self-respect is destroyed, one small compromise at a time. You don't wake up one day weak. You become weak by slowly tolerating what once would have been unacceptable. Toxic people don't push boundaries all at once. They test one line at a time. First, they ignore a promise. Then they criticize your choices. Then they guilt trip you for saying no. Then they play the victim when you stand up for yourself. And before you realize it, you've spent months or years defending yourself to someone who should have respected you from the beginning. When you make the mistake of trying to change a toxic person, you give them control over your identity. You start reacting to every insult, every cold shoulder, every mood swing, trying to figure out what you did wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. You simply allowed someone who lacks accountability to train you into thinking you're responsible for their behavior. But the truth is, toxic people don't act the way they do because of you. They act that way because it benefits them. They manipulate because it works. They disrespect you because you stay. They gaslight you because you keep explaining yourself. They continue because you allow continuation. And that's exactly why the solution isn't changing them. It's changing what you allow. When you set real standards, emotions stop controlling your decisions. You stop choosing peace at the cost of self-respect. You stop apologizing for having boundaries. You stop sacrificing your sanity for someone else's comfort. Standards don't require arguments, they require action. A boundary is not a discussion, it's a choice. You don't need to yell, lecture, or beg. You simply decide what behavior you will not accept, and then you leave when it continues. That's where your power is. Toxic people don't respond to love or logic, but they always respond to consequences. The moment you stop trying to change them, they lose the ability to control you. And the moment you raise your standards, you take back your life. Toxic people don't need truth, they don't need logic, and they don't need justice. All they need is your reaction. That's the fuel they survive on. They don't get stronger because they're smarter or more powerful. They get stronger every time you get emotional, every time you argue back, every time you try to prove yourself. Your reaction is their paycheck. Your attention is their victory. The moment you get triggered, they've already won, because now you're dancing to their rhythm, trying to defend yourself against accusations they don't even believe. They never cared about the argument, they cared about the control. Toxic people can't survive silence. They need drama, confusion, guilt, or conflict to stay relevant. They want you explaining, apologizing, justifying. They want you emotional, overwhelmed, and desperate for peace. Why? Because when you're emotional, you're predictable. When you're predictable, you're controllable. It's easy to manipulate someone who responds to every provocation. Think about how a bully behaves. They poke you just to see you break. They insult you just to see you react. They stay calm while you get loud. They play the victim while you look like the problem. That's the strategy. They don't need truth. They need chaos. The only way to disarm a toxic person is to remove the one thing they depend on, your reaction. Silence, boundaries, and consequences don't give them the attention they're fishing for. The moment you stop explaining yourself, they lose their leverage. When you refuse to argue, they can't twist your words. When you don't get emotional, they can't play the victim. Most people think silence is weak, but silence is power without wasted energy. Silence forces them to face their own behavior without using you as the escape route. A toxic person wants you to believe that if you don't respond, you're guilty, you're weak, or you're running away. But the truth is, arguing with someone who has no intention of understanding you is the real weakness. The strongest move isn't fighting back. It's refusing to enter the ring. You don't win by out-talking them. You win by not giving them an audience. You don't win by proving they're wrong. You win by showing that their opinion doesn't affect your decisions, your peace, or your identity. When you stay calm, they get frustrated. When you don't react, they lose direction. When you don't explain yourself, they panic because now they have nothing to twist, nothing to use against you. Silence corners them into having to deal with their own emptiness. Manipulation doesn't work when you're no longer trying to be understood. Toxic people only control those who need communication to feel safe. The less you react, the less access they have. And that's why the most powerful response is no response at all. Boundaries speak louder than explanations. Disengagement hits harder than arguments. And your calmness is the one thing they can't manipulate. If your self-worth depends on their approval, you're already controlled, because you can't influence, negotiate with, or stand up to someone whose validation you crave. The moment you need someone to like you, respect you, or accept you, you give them the authority to decide your emotional value. You become a prisoner to their reactions. One compliment and you feel confident. One criticism and you collapse. One moment of affection and you feel secure. One moment of distance and you panic. That isn't love, loyalty, or respect. It's dependency dressed as connection. And toxic people thrive on that dependency because it gives them invisible leverage over your identity. Most people think manipulation happens through force, anger, or intimidation, but the most powerful form of manipulation is approval. Toxic people learn exactly what you want to hear, and then they use it strategically. They praise you when they need something. They suddenly become caring when you think about leaving. They speak gently when you're about to confront them. They know the right words to keep you hopeful, and they deliver just enough kindness to make you believe they can change. You confuse crumbs for love, and they feed you those crumbs to keep you emotionally loyal. It's not affection. It's control masked as connection. People who crave validation from toxic individuals become easy targets because they start modifying their behavior just to maintain peace. They downplay their achievements so the toxic person doesn't feel threatened. They apologize for things they didn't do just to avoid conflict. They hide their growth because they fear it will upset the other person. They silence their opinions, ignore their needs, and pretend to be someone smaller, quieter, and more manageable just to keep the connection alive. And the tragedy is the person they're trying to impress will never be satisfied. The approval you chase is a moving target, and every time you get close, they shift it again. You can't build a strong identity on unstable validation. If someone can make you feel worthless with a word, they own your confidence. If they can make you feel anxious by ignoring you, they own your peace. If they can make you feel guilty for putting yourself first, they own your boundaries. That's not a relationship. That's emotional captivity. And the longer you chase their approval, the more invisible the chains become. Real power begins the moment you stop needing validation from the wrong people. When your self-respect becomes more important than their acceptance, you think differently, speak differently, and act differently. You stop begging for closure. You stop justifying your feelings. You stop explaining why you deserve basic respect. You stop shrinking yourself to protect their ego. You outgrow them instead of trying to change them. And when you no longer depend on their approval to feel worthy, their influence collapses, their manipulation fails, and their control disappears. The strongest identity is the one that doesn't require permission to exist. Your success makes toxic people uncomfortable, not because you've done anything wrong, but because your growth exposes what they refuse to become. Toxic individuals don't hate you for who you are. They hate you for reminding them of what they've wasted: time, talent, ambition, discipline, courage. Your improvement shines a light on their stagnation, and instead of rising to your level, they try to pull you down to theirs. They attack you not because you're flawed, but because you're proof that they settled. Your resilience, your progress, your confidence, your determination all threaten the stories they tell themselves to justify why they never tried, never changed, never fought for more. Your existence disrupts their comfort with mediocrity. A toxic person can tolerate you as long as you're struggling. They can love you when you're dependent, praise you when you're lost, support you when you're weak. But the moment you begin to grow, they shift. Suddenly, they criticize your dreams, question your decisions, mock your goals, and undermine your confidence. They don't want you to succeed because your success removes their excuses. If you rise, they have to face the truth that they could have risen to. And nothing threatens a fragile ego more than someone actually doing what they only talk about. Some toxic people pretend to be supportive. They'll act impressed, but you can feel the tension underneath. Their compliments are backhanded. Their encouragement is lukewarm. Their questions aren't curiosity. Their jealousy disguised as concern. They say things like, "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Or, "Don't forget where you came from." Or, "Don't try to be something you're not." They try to humble you, not because you're arrogant, but because your confidence bothers them. They talk about staying realistic. What they really mean is, "Don't outgrow me." You'll notice toxic people begin to distance themselves, gossip about you, or try harder to highlight your mistakes once you start improving. They want to remind you of who you used to be because they can't handle who you're becoming. They'll say you've changed, and they'll say it like an insult. But the truth is, they're mad because you're changing without their permission. You're evolving beyond their control. You're choosing growth over comfort, and they hate that because they worship comfort more than progress. The people who criticize your growth today will one day pretend they supported you all along. That's how toxic people survive. They rewrite the story. They'll claim credit for your success, act like they always believed in you, and pretend they taught you something valuable. But you'll know the truth. They didn't guide your growth. They resisted it. They didn't inspire your ambition. They tried to suffocate it. They weren't against your dream because you were wrong. They were against it because they gave up on their own. Your progress is a mirror, and toxic people hate reflections that reveal their inaction. So don't shrink, don't dim, don't apologize for rising. You're not the problem. You're simply proof that they could have chosen greatness too. The real power is walking away without explaining yourself, because there is nothing more intimidating to a toxic person than someone who doesn't need to be understood, doesn't need to defend themselves, and doesn't need permission to leave. Toxic people are experts at trapping you in conversations that go nowhere. They want explanations, justifications, emotional breakdowns, endless debates, and long messages that prove you still care. They feed on your need to prove your intentions. They don't seek truth, they seek engagement. And every minute you spend explaining what they already know is another minute you're trapped in their cycle. Silence ruins that cycle. Disengagement exposes it. Walking away steals the power they were sure they had over you. When you walk away without explanation, you communicate something louder than any speech. You value your peace more than their opinion. Toxic people don't know how to handle someone who refuses to argue. They rely on hooking you with guilt, baiting you into arguments, or making you feel like you owe them clarity. They ask questions not to understand, but to provoke a reaction. And the more you react, the deeper they pull you into the emotional quicksand. But when you stop responding and simply leave, they're forced to face what they fear the most, irrelevance. You take away their stage, their audience, their emotional supply. People don't realize that explanations are a form of permission. When you explain why you're setting a boundary, it sounds like you're asking for approval. When you justify why you're leaving, it looks like you're trying to be forgiven. When you defend your choices, you're surrendering your decision to someone else's judgment. Toxic people weaponize that. They twist your words, minimize your feelings, use your vulnerability to manipulate you, and keep you engaged long enough to pull you back into their chaos. The cleanest exit is unannounced, not because you're hiding, but because you refuse to negotiate over your own self-respect. Walking away isn't about playing games or being cold. It's about protecting your mental clarity. It's about understanding that not everyone deserves access to your emotions. Some people don't need closure, they need consequences. Closure happens when you accept their behavior for what it is, not when you try to make them understand what they already know, but refuse to acknowledge. Toxic people don't lack awareness, they lack accountability. And you can't teach accountability to someone who benefits from manipulation. The strongest boundaries require no speeches. You don't have to announce your standards. You live them. You don't have to warn someone you're leaving. You leave the moment you realize the cost of staying. You don't have to prove you were right. The truth becomes obvious when you stop participating in the dysfunction. Your absence is the lesson. Your silence is the closure. Your peace is the evidence that you made the right decision. A toxic person wants you to stay tangled in arguments so they can still feel important. They want you to defend yourself so they can pretend they have the right to judge you. They want you to play the role of the emotional caretaker, the explainer, the fixer. But when you simply walk away, you remove their control, you show that you don't need to be chosen, understood, or validated to move forward. You show that their opinion has no impact on your identity. You show that peace is more valuable than connection. The real power is walking away without explaining yourself, because when you no longer need someone to understand your worth, you finally understand it yourself. Your silence becomes your answer, and your departure becomes your victory.